Would you trust your life to someone who believes not everyone deserves to live? In one of the most respected hospitals in the United States, a doctor praised for her clinical efficiency, her surgical coolness, and her impeccable track record. Hid a secret so dark it seemed straight out of a psychological thriller. For years, she cared for hundreds of patients in the ICU, but she didn't just care. She decided, alone, silently, with pen, scalpel, and coldly written diagnoses, she judged who should keep fighting and who was no longer worth the effort. The scariest part, she was considered a role model, an inspiration to young doctors. She received awards. She was applauded at conferences. But behind the locked doors of the intensive care unit, the truth was stifled. What was presented as protocols of conduct hid definitive decisions, made without anyone's consent, solely out of the conviction that she was doing what was best for the system. It wasn't about saving lives. It was about selecting the ones she thought were still worth saving. This isn't just a crime story. It's a moral indictment, an uncomfortable mirror. Because perhaps the real question isn't what she did, but how they let her do it for so long. Prepare to immerse yourself in a tense, emotional, disturbing, and absolutely necessary narrative. A story that reveals the most dangerous side of power, the one hidden beneath the white coat of medical authority, and one that forces us to reflect. How far is the line between curing and controlling life? In a small American town, surrounded by hills and the typical tranquility of a place where everyone knows each other by name, St. Mercy Hospital was seen as a symbol of hope. And within its cold walls and corridors lit by tired fluorescent lights, one figure stood out: Dr. Evelyn Carter. Young, competent, dedicated to the core. A woman with a steady gaze and soft speech, who exuded confidence with the simple gesture of holding a clipboard. Her colleagues respected her. Her patients, even in agony, smiled when they saw her enter. She has the hands of an angel, they would say on city street corners. But what few knew or pretended not to realize is that where there's too much brightness, there may be something dark lurking in the shadows. Dr. Evelyn was praised for her intelligence and composure. She handled extreme emergencies with a calm that bordered on the supernatural. Introspective, polite, almost impenetrable. But what truly set her apart from other doctors was her decision-making. While some hesitated in the face of uncertainty, she chose quickly. This one will live. This one ... won't make it. And no one dared question her. Her bed management rates were praised by the administration. Efficiency, the report said. Resource control, the directors justified. But the nurses began to notice a pattern. Seriously ill but stable patients were transferred to the ICU under their supervision, and simply never left. It was as if death itself chose to act only in the early hours of the morning when she was on duty. At first, the whispers were muffled by institutional loyalty. We can't accuse someone so dedicated, they said. But when a young patient, just 23 years old, with a chance of recovery, died without a convincing explanation, a feeling of insecurity began to haunt the hallways. The chart was incomplete, the night nurse had been replaced, and the bedside camera ... turned off. Evelyn, serene, simply said it was the best for her, and continued her shift as if nothing had happened. Some older colleagues, guided by the wisdom of experience, began to gather notes, reports, and patterns. But to report would be to declare war on the system itself, and no one wanted to be the first to break the silence. Until something happened, and it was no longer possible to pretend it was just a coincidence. The ICU routine, though intense, followed an almost choreographed pattern: alarms, rushing, protocols. But under Dr. Evelyn's supervision, everything seemed too quietly mechanical. Nurses exchanged glances as if they knew something wasn't right, but didn't have the courage to name it. Patients who entered critical condition under her care simply didn't leave. There was no shouting, no urgency, just heavy silences and laconic charts. Evelyn said little, but acted with the coldness of someone who believes they've seen too much. And this, oddly enough, was mistaken for emotional intelligence. The strangest thing was the repetition, the same procedures, the same justifications, the same absence of family members in the final hours. Anyone paying attention with insight and courage would have noticed there was a sinister pattern masquerading as competence. One night, a nursing assistant named Rachel noticed something that chilled her to the bone. An elderly patient who had been showing signs of improvement suddenly went into cardiorespiratory arrest minutes after receiving an injection. Evelyn had requested the procedure. The justification? Thromboprophylaxis. But Rachel, guided by her sensitivity and respect for life, realized that the substance made no sense for that clinical condition. She decided to review previous records, and what she found left her devastated. 4 other patients had received the same prescription, all under Evelyn's watch. All had died. This couldn't be a coincidence. But doubt gnawed at her more than the truth itself. What if reporting the matter would risk her career, or even worse? Fear began to take hold. And in this environment, where the facade of kindness hid cruel decisions, where insecurity silenced the good and appearances masked intentions, tension grew. Evelyn continued her work as if nothing were out of the ordinary. She received praise for optimizing ICU flow and was cited in administrative meetings as an example of medical efficiency. Meanwhile, mothers wept silently in the hallway, husbands left with lost eyes, and children were left orphaned, never understanding what had truly happened. Compassion was just institutional rhetoric. Humanity had been silenced, but like every well-told lie, there comes a time when reality begins to leak through the cracks. And as much as Evelyn appeared in control, something or someone was about to break the cycle with a dose of truth no one expected. What many saw as merely a nagging intuition, he decided to treat as a calling. Marcus Hawley, an experienced nurse, a man of few words and great zeal, began to note patterns. He was not impulsive. On the contrary, he was respected precisely for his humility and quiet intelligence. But there was something his conscience could no longer ignore. In more than 2 decades in the profession, he had never seen so many unexplained deaths concentrated under the responsibility of a single doctor. At first, he tried to rationalize. Maybe it's just coincidences, serious cases, fate. But his honesty prevented him from pretending he didn't see it. Each missing name seemed to scream for justice. And so he began recording everything: schedules, medications, symptoms before and after appointments. Not with anger, but with empathy. Because deep down, he knew the truth doesn't hide forever. With the discreet help of Rachel, the assistant he'd been suspicious of, for weeks, Marcus created a hidden spreadsheet. They compared shifts, medications administered, inconsistent diagnoses, and even subtle shift changes among technicians who might testify. With each new death, a new piece of information fell into place like a piece of a dark puzzle. But there was a stalemate: how to prove something without being accused of defamation? How to pursue a complaint when the accused was seen as an example of wisdom and professional compassion? More was needed: indisputable evidence. That's when Rachel, in a moment of courage, decided to simulate copying a report for a patient, but ended up saving a CCTV video from the ICU. The content was subtle but disturbing. Evelyn turning off a patient's monitoring without justification, seconds before cardiac arrest. Even with the evidence in hand, the moral dilemma grew. What if they were misinterpreted? What if they were wrong? But Marcus's conscience screamed louder than his fear. He knew that many lives could have been saved if someone had acted sooner. It wasn't just about denouncing a doctor. It was about breaking the complicit silence, the conformity. It was about a deep understanding of what it means to fight for life. They decided then to take the case to a chief physician who was about to retire someone who had already shown signs of distrust, but had never taken action. The conversation would be delicate, but inevitable. What Marcus and Rachel didn't imagine is that this doctor already had his own secret notes. And when three consciences meet, the truth finally begins to take shape, even if still whispered. On the surface, Dr. Evelyn's reports were impeccable. Not a comma out of place, well-written diagnoses, technical justifications within the protocols. For any manager or external auditor, that was synonymous with excellence. But when the retiring chief physician, Dr. Kenneth Ward, received the documents Marcus and Rachel had brought, something immediately bothered him. It wasn't just what was written. It was what wasn't. Tests were missing, there was no counter-evidence, and the repetition of vague terms like multiple failure or poor response to treatment was frightening. Evelyn never made a mistake. She had never been challenged. Her cases never received a second opinion. And that, in real medicine, is practically impossible. Even the most experienced make mistakes. But Evelyn seemed immune to error, and that, for someone with clinical wisdom, was the first sign that something was wrong. Dr. Kenneth, driven by a mixture of indignation and a desire for justice, cross-referenced the ICU data with those from the autopsy and organ donation departments. What he discovered was shocking. In several of the cases attributed to Dr. Evelyn, there were inconsistencies between the recorded time of death and the moment the organs were transported. Some procedures appeared to have been anticipated as if death were a certainty before it even occurred. This violated all ethical protocols. Furthermore, in some cases, family members had not even been consulted. There seemed to be an invisible rush to free up beds, a race for efficiency masking irreversible decisions. The cold mathematical nature of the graphs hid a moral tragedy. Kenneth knew this wasn't just negligence, it was premeditation. And perhaps it was worse than anyone imagined. It was time to act. But before taking the case to the authorities, Kenneth wanted to confront Evelyn directly. He chose a neutral day after work hours. He called her for a private conversation. He expected evasions, justifications, denials. But what he found was something even more disturbing. Evelyn showed no fear, nor surprise. She simply crossed her arms, looked him in the eye, and said with unsettling serenity, "Not everyone deserves to live, doctor." That wasn't medical coldness. It was conviction. A distorted belief, a dangerous rationalization. Kenneth left that office trembling. He knew that, from that moment on, the accusation would be inevitable. But he also knew he was dealing with someone who believed herself to be a kind of judge of life and death. And when you face someone like that, there's no turning back. Only the hard road to truth. Dr. Kenneth wasted no time. He wrote a detailed report with all the documents, videos, notes, and inconsistencies he found. He attached his signature, Marcus's and Rachel's, and sent the dossier to the hospital's board of directors and the ethics committee. He sincerely believed the evidence would speak for itself, that the system, even bureaucratic, would have the integrity to act in the face of something so serious. But days passed, and nothing happened. No special meeting. No summons. No statement. Evelyn continued her shifts as if nothing was happening. The silence within the walls was suffocating. This wasn't just an oversight, it was collusion. And Kenneth, who knew the hospital's inner workings well, began to understand. Perhaps Evelyn wasn't just being tolerated. Perhaps she was being protected. Meanwhile, Rachel was transferred to another department without explanation. Marcus began receiving warnings for minor administrative errors, mistakes he'd never made before. Kenneth, for his part, had his retirement accelerated with forced praise and requests not to get involved in things that could tarnish his career. It was a polite way of removing them from the picture. But nothing hurt more than seeing patients enter the ICU and knowing they were under the care of someone with a suspicious history. The realization that the system preferred to keep up appearances rather than face the truth was deeply hurtful. Fear now was accompanied by anger. Anger at cowardice, anger at slowness, anger at the world that turns its back when humanity most needs action. But there was still hope, because outside the corridors, there was someone who would listen. It was then that Rachel, driven by her perseverance and a sense of justice, made a bold decision. She sent a copy of the dossier to a local investigative journalist. This wasn't just any journalist. This was someone known for tackling difficult allegations, a woman driven by courage, honesty, and a profound respect for life. Her name was Lena Brooks, and she had a history of reporting that had already brought down authorities. Rachel knew this could cost her job. Marcus also knew that confirming the data would risk his reputation. But how could one ignore it? How could one remain silent when one had the chance to prevent further tragedies? The report needed to reach beyond the institution's walls. It needed to touch the heart of society. And more than anything, it needed to find a real channel. Lena accepted the material. And when she opened it, she knew it would change everything. Lena Brooks wasn't the type to publish before verifying. Her reputation had been built on meticulous investigation, rigorous ethics, and a dose of courage, bordering on stubborn heroism. When she received the material, she spent sleepless nights cross-referencing data, calling internal contacts, listening to anonymous testimonies, and checking official records. What she found was more than appalling. It was an affront to the concept of human dignity. The article was published on a Monday morning titled, "ICU Doctor or Judge of Death? Behind the Scenes at the Quietest Hospital in the City." The content featured documents, videos, protected testimonies, graphs, and a nagging question: who decides who lives and who dies? The city stopped. The hospital trembled. And on social media, the commotion spread like wildfire. In the comments, people shared similar stories. Parents who lost children, husbands who buried healthy wives, young people who were hospitalized with reversible conditions and never returned. The report had unearthed old pain, but it also ignited something powerful, a sense of community. Humanity, faced with the pain of others, awakened a sense of genuine solidarity. It was no longer just about Evelyn. It was about a system that preferred numbers to names, statistics to faces, performance to compassion. Public pressure was immediate. Authorities were forced to open a formal investigation. The hospital, once praised for its clinical efficiency, became national headlines. TV shows debated the case. And in the midst of it all, Evelyn disappeared. She requested leave for emotional reasons. But the word on the street was clear. She was running away from the truth. Even after leaving, Evelyn continued to spark controversial reactions. Some former colleagues still defended her, claiming that there was no conclusive evidence, that it was all exaggerated. But the majority of the population demanded justice. And in the midst of this turmoil, Lena made a point of going further. She began investigating not only Evelyn, but also the structure that protected her. She discovered archived emails, deleted meetings, silence agreements. And the more she dug, the more she found. It was like opening a basement that had been locked for years, full of files covered in dust and neglect. Lena's inspiration, however, wasn't just professional. It was human. She had lost a brother under similar circumstances years before. And now, with empathy and resilience, she felt she was giving voice to all who had been silenced. The town wanted answers, but what came next would be even more revealing. As the investigation began to gain national traction, reporters and curious people began to comb through not only clinical data, but also Evelyn's past. What they found would leave anyone speechless. Evelyn Carter, the doctor admired for her professional composure, came from a childhood marked by silent tragedies. The daughter of an alcoholic father and an emotionally unstable mother, she grew up in an environment where love was conditioned and understanding was rare. At the age of 9, she watched her own sister die of asthma while her mother argued with her father in the kitchen. From then on, she began to see pain as a natural part of life, something inevitable, like rain or the death of autumn. She grew up with the idea that saving someone wasn't a right ... it was a choice. And that choice, she believed, belonged to the most prepared. During medical school, Evelyn was brilliant. First in everything, but emotionally ... She was an enigma. She never cried, never engaged. Teachers said she had pure intelligence, but emotional blocks. Classmates tried to get closer, but always felt distant. Once in a bioethics class, while everyone was debating the value of life in life-threatening situations, Evelyn said something that, at the time, went unnoticed. Some lives consume more than they give. Perhaps medicine needs to understand this. No one paid much attention. After all, she was just a student. But now in the current context, those words took on a macabre weight. Her coldness wasn't just technical. It was a philosophy built on trauma, loneliness, and a dangerous lack of emotional intelligence. And little by little, society began to wonder, who shaped such a mind? As the public sought justice, forensic psychologists began profiling Evelyn for the investigation. What emerged was a disturbing portrait. A woman with traits of cold narcissism, selective empathy, and a sense of superiority masked by rationality. It wasn't overt malice, but a deep conviction that her way of deciding was more efficient than nature itself. She believed she was offering solutions. And because of this, she didn't see herself as a criminal, but as someone who optimized suffering. A perverse logic, built over decades of silence and misdirected resilience. The greatest pain in this story was perhaps not just for the victims, but for the realization that, at some point in her life, Evelyn could have been saved from herself. If only someone had offered true affection before darkness became her only language. But there was still more to come. The courtroom was packed. Cameras, reporters, activists, former patients, victims' families. All their eyes fixed on that woman in a lab coat, now replaced by a beige suit with an unblinking gaze. Evelyn Carter sat straight, as if in a clinical meeting, not a murder trial. The prosecutor opened the case with a cutting sentence. Today we judge not just one person, but the fine line between care and control, between saving and deciding who should die. The city, previously dormant in its routine, now breathed through this process. It was humanity itself in dispute. The atmosphere was one of emotion and anticipation. The first witnesses were moved. Nurses wept. Mothers broke down. But Evelyn? She remained serene, as if each accusation only confirmed what she already knew. That, deep down, she had no regrets. The defense, however, surprised everyone. He claimed that Evelyn had not committed any crimes, but had made clinical decisions within protocol, that the system was flawed, and that she had been forced to choose between lives due to a lack of infrastructure. Citing data on hospital overload, funding cuts, and bed shortages, they attempted to portray the defendant as a victim of the system. And many, absurd as it seemed, wavered. After all, who has never seen an overcrowded hospital, an emergency room without a stretcher? A patient waiting for days? The line between logic and compassion was blurred. Some people began to question, had she acted alone? Or was she merely a symptom of something greater? The trial left the city conflicted. Because more than judging Evelyn, it was necessary to confront the moral bankruptcy of a society that often chooses efficiency over kindness. During the testimony, one point became the focus of attention: intent. Evelyn did not deny her actions, but neither did she admit guilt. She said with disturbing sincerity, "I did what needed to be done." When asked if she would do things differently, she replied, "Death is not the end. It's just a necessary full stop for some." These words cut the air in the room. Some jurors looked away. Others clasped their hands on the arms of their chairs. The jury's inspiration, which had previously sought clarity, now faced a profound dilemma. What is justice when the accused believes they did the right thing? The trial continued, but it was already leaving scars. Because more than convicting or acquitting, that process demanded internal reconciliation from the city with its values, its choices, and its own tolerance for silence. And when the sentence was handed down, the entire country stopped to watch. When the judge entered the room to read the sentence, the silence was so thick it seemed a heavy in the air. Evelyn remained standing, as if awaiting the verdict with the same coolness with which she conducted her shifts. The jury, after long deliberations, found her guilty of intentional homicide on multiple counts, but acknowledged mitigating circumstances related to hospital management and institutional negligence. The sentence? 25 years in prison, with no possibility of progression before 15 years. The city erupted in mixed reactions. Some applauded, crying. Some were shocked. Some said it was not enough. Others that it was unfair. But there was one thing unanimous. No one left indifferent. The pain had become a collective memory. And justice, however imperfect, had taken the first step. Outside the courthouse, signs with slogans like "Life is not measured in beds" and "No pain should be disposable" dotted the landscape. Rachel and Marcus together breathed a sigh of relief, not for the punishment, but for the end of a cycle. The gratitude for the support of ordinary people who donated time, courage, and even money to support the complaint was immense. Evelyn, leaving handcuffed, looked up and smiled. That gave even the most skeptical chills. It was as if she, still there, believed she had done what she believed was right, and that was more frightening than any sentence. The city now needed to relearn what it meant to care. The hospital underwent renovations, changes in management, and training focused on emotional intelligence, empathy, and humanity. But wounds like those ... take time to heal. In local schools, teachers began including discussions on medical ethics and morality. Young nursing students now read the case as required study. Evelyn had become an example, not an inspiration, but a warning. Her story echoed as a warning that without understanding, altruism, and true love, even the most brilliant knowledge can become destructive. And for many, the greatest lesson was that remaining silent in the face of injustice is also a choice, and that the price of inaction can be lives. Rachel began lecturing at universities. Marcus founded an emotional support project for healthcare professionals. And Lena Brooks published a best-selling book titled The Shift That Never Ended. But there was still one final piece missing in this story. A new page that showed that, from pain, something truly transformative could be born. Months after the trial ended, the hospital's ICU reopened its doors under a new name, Unidade Vita Plena. It wasn't just a cosmetic change. Every detail of the environment was rethought. More natural light, humanized spaces, the presence of psychologists, chaplaincy accessible to all faiths, and a team trained not only in technique, but also in emotional intelligence. What was once a cold, silent corridor now overflowed with affection and hope. Marcus was invited to lead the nursing team. Rachel became humanization coordinator. Both turned down administrative positions. They wanted to be close to people, to feel, to listen, to care with love. The hospital, once known for scandal, now became a national benchmark in ethics and reconciliation. An open wound had become a scar, and this scar told a story that would never be forgotten. With each patient welcomed, there was a silent commitment. You matter. Young doctors underwent immersion programs that included not only clinical case studies, but also letters from families affected in the past. It was a way to keep memory alive without fueling fear. The goal was to train not just healthcare professionals, but guardians of human dignity. Collective grief had given way to generosity, cross-sector collaboration, and human-centered innovation. Rachel always told new interns, "Knowledge without compassion is like a scalpel without hands. It can cut, but it will never heal." And although the shadow of the past still loomed large over some hearts, there was now a new light, the certainty that overcoming is possible when the truth is faced with humility and pain is converted into purpose. Years later, a plaque was placed at the entrance to the new ICU with the names of all those who had the courage to confront the system: Rachel, Marcus, Dr. Kenneth, Lena Brooks. And even the names of the victims were honored there. It was the ultimate symbol of reconciliation with the past and inspiration for the future. Evelyn, for her part, remained reclusive, without interviews, without letters. Her name no longer appeared in the hospital's public records, but her impact that would never be erased. Because the story, marked by fear, insecurity, courage, and transformation, had planted something greater, a seed of humanity in a system that, for too long, had forgotten the power of kindness. And there, in that reborn space, lives were now being saved not only with technique, but with truth, understanding, and genuine love. And all of this, thanks to those who dared not remain silent. Now that you know the whole truth, tell me, what would you do if you discovered that someone with the power to save also chooses who should die? This story stirs our deepest values, and perhaps what's most frightening is that it could happen anywhere, including ... right next door. Are we paying enough attention to the decisions made behind the scenes? Could it be that overconfidence in positions, diplomas, and authority doesn't prevent us from questioning what needs to be questioned? How many Evelyns are still out there, disguised as efficiency, praised for their coldness, protected by omission? And most importantly, do we have enough courage to face this kind of truth, even when it challenges everything we believe? Now I want to hear from you. What's your opinion on all this? Do you believe Dr. Evelyn acted out of malice, conviction, or because of a flawed system? Leave your comment below. Your opinion matters, and it can inspire others to reflect as well. Let's build this debate together. If this content made you think, if it bothered you, if it moved you, or awakened something, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with those who need to hear this story. Here, we don't just tell truths. We provoke transformation.